Welcome back to the Grand Solar Minimum channel. Today is Tuesday, August 2nd, 2022. Taking a look at our star right now, our solar wind speed's coming in at 535.9 kilometers per second with a density of 9.81. Believe it or not, only a sunspot number of 32, and that's with another sunspot grouping. So we'll get a little bit more in-depth look at that when we go over to the grandsolarminimum.com. But for now, cosmic radiation dosage rates definitely went up from yesterday's report. We were at 1.1%. Now we are sitting at a 2.3%. That is a 1.1% increase in just the last 48 hours. So we saw readings of cosmic radiation dosage rates at neutral and below. Just slightly below zero. But point being, since we started this channel, I haven't seen cosmic radiation dosage rates lower than 5%, and now here we are talking about zero. So this all kind of adds up when we're talking about maximum, and we're seeing the decreased cosmic radiation, especially like right now where we're sitting at a 2.3%. It's still elevated at this point. So interesting to see while during a maximum that we are still elevated in cosmic radiation dosage rates. And that also, to me, verifies the weak magnetic connection from the sun and the earth, which means we have a weaker magnetosphere. And if we have a weaker magnetosphere, that means we have a weaker corona as well. This is going to be an abbreviated solar cycle, and I'll get more into that as well. Still looking at a G1 storm watch, but I tell you, reading the reports on this, no one's really expecting anything from this particular the CME that we're watching right now. So right now it sounds like it's going to be a big fat nothing, and we'll keep our eyes on it, of course. KP indice of 3, that's went up just a little bit. Last night we were at a 1 when we had current conditions. Our 24-hour max is also at a 3. So space weather right now is just moderate. Solar wind speeds are moderate for sure, above average, I would say, the 535.9 kilometers per second. Now, also, I want to point out, too, that that kind of solar wind speed is also coordinated with solar minimum. And boy, Mari, I don't know if you're getting any complaints in the chat, but I see the signal going all over the place. Like someone is not wanting us to broadcast tonight. I don't know. No? We're good. All right. So, with that being said, I'll move on to our Grand Solar Minimum page ourselves. Well, not that page yet, but we are going to talk about that too. All right, so let's check out the Grand Solar Minimum. Get our space weather fix here. Oh, I should already have this done. While we're waiting for our page to load up, I wanted to show you guys the sunspot groupings right now. And when we get to the page, our page, you'll also see. Oh, I didn't want to do that. So right now we have 2 rather decent sized sunspots, or do we? I'm going to go ahead and try to move this up for you guys a little bit because you cannot even see that. So this is pretty ridiculous. All right, let's do that. There we go. All right, so there we are, AR3068 and AR3070. AR3070 looks non-existent. So really the bulk of this is with AR3068. AR3070, let's zoom this. I mean, look at this sunspot, folks. Let me try to raise this up for you. Do you see any dark cores? And this is part of a discussion that I see a lot on Twitter. Back in the Maunder minimum, when we saw the sunspot data with, it looks like there were 0 sunspots during the Grand Solar Minimum back then. But was it really that quiet? Was my question. Because I highly doubt during the moderate minimum that they had equipment that could pick up AR 3070 at all. So, again, what we have today is way better than what we had back then in the 1600s. So, the fact that I feel like the accuracy of these sunspot predictions, especially by the work of Valentina Zarkova, her accuracy on Solar Cycle 24's prediction was 97%. And Solar Cycle 25, I got to start paying more attention to her work, but I sent her a message on Skype the other day, and I said, hey, it looks like we're going to have a short max and head into an early minimum and decline into a minimum. Hold on a second here. All right, just trying to deal with some of these technical difficulties I'm having on my end. Thankfully, it's not coming out on your guys' end. But back to the sunspot counts. We didn't see these back in the 1600s. So, but my amazement is with Valentina Zarkova's work, with the magnetic field of the sun, solar dynamo theory, and of course her brilliance in mathematics. And this is how she has come up with these timelines for this upcoming grand solar minimum. Now, a lot of folks say, well, Zarkova said 2030 to 2053. And yes, she did say that. But we do have her on a couple of interviews here on this channel, 2017 and also in 2019, where she did say that we are already in the beginning of a grand solar minimum. And I think what people get confused is that I think she's looking at the second cycle. Because remember, you have to have 2 consecutive solar cycles of lower than average activity. In fact, let's go to my Twitter page because there is a graph I have. It's an update on where we are right now, and I kind of want to show that off for a minute because this goes in. This is why Zarkova was possibly talking about we are already in it. Was she possibly referring to? No, she wasn't. There's no way she was referring to solar cycle 23 being weaker than average. We can clearly see sunspot numbers well past the 220, the 240 for the max. So smooth sunspot number. Well, I guess if you use a smooth sunspot number, the average is supposed to be around 180. Okay, so solar cycle 23 was barely below average. And technically, you can say that solar cycles 23 and 24 were the 2 consecutive solar cycles that were below average. Both of them were double peaks. But the big difference about the double peak here is that we have to see. Oh, let's do this. Sorry about that, folks. This is not working out the way I was hoping for. Let's see if I can do this. Yeah, that's a little better. Everybody's probably wondering, like, what in the heck is he talking about? Well, so I can't get the whole thing. This is what happens when I don't let Mari set my my charts up for me. My point is that this is solar cycle 23 and 24, okay? And these technically are lower than average, especially 24, obviously. And 25 is supposed to be about the same or weaker before we get to solar cycle 26, which will then begin, I believe, the true grand solar minimum. And what I mean by that is that there won't be any questions about where we are in this particular solar cycle. There, I zoomed it in a little better on this here. Let's get our handy dandy arrow out. See, I believe right here we are seeing the beginning of the maximum in this solar cycle, which right now, if you look at the first peak in solar cycle 24, you'll see that we are not anywhere near that yet. It is possible we have seen one peak and we'll see another weak peak, which I think we've already seen that. But again, this solar cycle is going to run its course. Even if we had our maximum completed by late 2023 and we were starting to decline into a minimum in early 24, again, we were all saying that solar cycle 25 was going to see its maximum peak in the year 2025. Well, most of us were. Some of our friends, like David Birch, he always stood by his word that it was going to be earlier than that. And, of course, Zarkova had said the same thing in a paper that she wrote back in 2015. So if her solar cycle 24 prediction, which is right here, was 97% accuracy, what do you think solar cycle 25 is going to look like? In my opinion, I don't see a cycle that's stronger than what we have had already. And I'll tell you this, is there a double peak in this? Maybe. Does that indicate a more stronger grand solar minimum with lower solar activity? Don't know. We are heading into uncharted waters, folks. We really don't know. One thing we can base everything off of is previous historic records. We saw a time of less crop being harvested. We saw a time of famine. We saw a time of weather extremes during the Maunder minimum when it comes to cold and hot, drought and floods. So these are all part of weather extremes, which is kind of what I want to talk to you guys tonight about. And I want to thank Starman, David Birch from the UK. I'm sure, I don't know how I missed this. This is released last year in 2021. And I thought there were some really good points to point out to you guys here. And the reason why I want to talk about this is that the years that we're showing the decline really picking up, like after 2005, was when we started seeing these deeper minimums from solar cycle 23 into 24 and 24 into 25. We were starting to hear words like this was the deepest minimum in 100 years or, whatever. So it's interesting to see where we start to see the big decline. It's like we get that one last poof in 2005. And then after that, things rapidly decline. You see the downhill numbers here. What is this, you say? Annual number of climate-related disasters by disaster category. So we have climatological, meteorological, and hydrological. Say that really fast. But these are the amount of natural disasters since the year 2000. I'm not trying to be shady here, not show the work, but let's face it, folks, we've got 20 years of data here, and it's showing us a decline in natural disasters. That's just one part of this report. By the way, this is from the Global Warming Policy Forum. I might have just butchered that. Here's another thing I wanted to show too. The global annual death rates from natural disasters from 1900 to 2015. Now, this might be a little bit biased, and I'm sure that we'll probably see an increase in death if we were able to include the data here. But at this point, we are going to show you numbers from previous points in our time. The 1920s, we had drought that took up the majority of the reason for the death rate. The drought. Well, that leads to a lot. Drier conditions, fires, famine. Earthquake, also in the 1920s. Now, between 1910 and 1930, we had a period of low solar activity. I believe that was called the Glassberg minimum. A very brief drop in solar activity for a couple of solar cycles, maybe just a 11-year cycle, 15 years tops, but it was very out of the blue. And, of course, we had the Dalton minimum right before that. But nonetheless, I think that's why we can correlate so many earthquake activity and so many deaths due to that. And then in the 1930s, look at the amount. The light blue is flood. The death rates from flood in 1930, folks. Do you pick up what I'm throwing down at you? And I'm not downplaying the deaths in Kentucky or St. Louis or Iran or Texas or anywhere else, or I'm sorry, Arizona or anywhere else that gets flash flooding. I'm not downplaying it. But I feel like there is an agenda by the mainstream media to label extreme weather events and call it climate change. And tonight I'm going to show you a couple examples of how extreme weather is not the same thing as climate change. I've always thought of climate change as where if I lived in a state that had really hot summers, and then all of a sudden for 5 to 10 years or longer, my summers weren't as hot. My winters were colder, and I actually started to see more snow, but my summers definitely cooled off. Well, that to me is climate change. What we're seeing when it comes to forest fires and global climate disasters is just extreme weather. A lot of it can be explained through solar activity. I'm going to keep moving through these. This is my favorite one. This is the heat waves, okay? This has made the most impact on the news. You see back here in 1890, these are the temperatures, how they've spiked all the way. And I would assume that the very last bar of this graph is going to probably resemble 2020, if I had to guess. Or it could be even current. Now, to sit here and say, oh, we're not seeing a gradual warming. Yes, we have seen gradual warming when it comes to temperatures here on Earth, but nothing to the point of what we're being told by the MSN. In fact, if you look at this, it's almost a straight line across, if not a very slight incline when you start it from the 1920s. But look back in 1910 in that period there, and that was during the Glassberg minimum, lower solar activity even was contributing to these heat waves. And again, during these grand solar minimums or these deep solar minimum cycles, we get to see a lot of phenomena, one called a sudden stratospheric warming event, which that wasn't even talked about back in the 1910s. So there's all kinds of things to take into place that's happened in the past, but we didn't have the technology to recognize what that was. Was this climate change or was this just an extreme weather event? Let's keep going because there's a lot of good stuff in this report. And I haven't always been at odds with these folks here. I think sometimes that doesn't matter because when the message is there, the message is there. These are the observed changes in heat wave, continuous U.S. The frequency, the bottom is the magnitude. So here we see the frequency of heat waves back in the early 1900s were far more greater, and we started to see an increase in the 1970s. But look at the difference of the frequency. Look how it drops. We've peaked. We've already plateaued. We're starting that drop again, okay? This graph shows me we're already plateaued and we're rounding the corner, as one would say. But again, here's your increase, and this is right around the 1930s, the 1940s, right before World War II. And then we started dropping, got really cold in the 50s and 60s. Remember, they were talking about global cooling by the early 70s. But then the temperature slowly started to rise. And again, folks, we're talking about, temperatures 12 degrees, 8 degrees. This down here is the magnitude of the heat wave, which means the strength. Look at that. You just got to look at it, You just got to look at it. But if you look at it, 1930s, once again, wins when it comes to strong heat waves. Remember the Dust Bowl. Remember that. That's the period of time this took place. And we've never seen a heat wave like the Dust Bowl. But yet you're going to hear mainstream media tell you that this is the hottest we've ever been in the history of our planet. But here we have data that goes up to 2020. Is it possible 2022 is spiked? Okay, sure. But does that mean that we're looking at climate change? Or is this just a weather extreme? Because again, climate change is when you see hot, and then it drops off and it's cold, 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 cold. That's climate change. Where the climate around you changes for more than 10 to 20 years. Not day to day or month to month or summer to summer. Cooling is decadal as well. So we still have a lot of time before we could sit here and say, all right, this is the amount of cooling we've seen in the last 10 years. So this paper, this report, I don't know how I missed it. This is another one that I really wanted to show you guys. Figure 8 here. And let's move it up. All right. So figure 8 is the daily U.S. maximum temperatures above 100 degrees Fahrenheit and 105. This goes from 1895 to 2018. The blue lines represent the 100 degrees, and the red lines represent the 105 degrees. Once again, we look at the 1930s, the mid-1930s, as the peak of these heat waves. During these extreme times of drought, too, by the way. Why weren't we talking about CO2 and climate change? That was the real climate change. The Dust Bowl. The climate change was here. And then it cooled off from the 30s into the 70s before a slight rise again. But look at this, guys. How can you sit here? And I'm talking to all of you. How can you sit here and vote for these clowns out there who are telling you that the world is getting hotter and that temperatures, now the data sources know us. So before you try to attack me for cherry picking on something else, this is coming from the horse's mouth. But this is the extent of heat waves. This is the extent of how many days in the hundreds we have. Look at this, guys. These are the days. So in the early 2010s, we saw around 10 days or more of days over 100. Look at the days over 105. Do we see this major spike? Do we see this global crisis? This hothouse forming right in front of our eyes. Do you see this? And this is the most important part. This is probably where we'll get cut off the air. North America. These are the record high temperatures in Celsius. Okay, so for all of you out there who have been talking about the hottest recorded record temperature, listen to this. North America, 56.7 degrees Celsius, set back in 1913. Europe, 48 degrees Celsius, set back in 1977. South America, 48.9 degrees, 1905. Again, I know some of these records have been challenged, but I have a point, so just listen. Asia, 53.9, set back in 2016. Africa set at 55 degrees Celsius. That was back in 1931. Australia, 50.7, and that was in 1960. Antarctica was at 19.8, and that was in 1982. Now, this report stops in 2020 and was published in 2021. But the point I'm trying to make here is that we have seen record high temperatures before. Again, is extreme weather climate change? Or is it just a phenomenon that happens from time to time? If it scares you that North America hasn't broke this record in over 100 years, don't let it scare you. It's going to happen any moment now. It happens. Maybe we did hit a spike. Maybe there is data that comes out that challenges what we had in the 1930s. Maybe it's half that strength. It's possible. We've had a lot of hot days this year. But the point I'm trying to make here, folks, is that this is not human-induced. If records were set back in 1931, in 1913, in 1905, before we were considered in an industrial world. And on top of that, we have talked about, and this report also goes into marine. I didn't get too much into that, really. Coral bleaching, this is above my pay grade. But, here's the best part. The cold extremes. Evidence for increasing cold extremes continue to accumulate in 2020, with cold temperature records being broken all over the globe. During the 2020 southern winter and northern summer, the Australian island state of Tasmania recorded most frigid winter minimum ever, exceeding previous low of negative 13 degrees Celsius, which is 8.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And that was by 1.2 degrees Celsius. Now, Norway endured its chilliest July in 50 years. Neighboring Sweden shivered through its coldest summer since 1962. Russia was also bone-chilling cold. Now, this was all in 2020. Now, was this climate change? No. These were weather extremes. The difference here from what we talk about on this channel and what the mainstream is trying to tell you is that these extremes are expected to continue to happen, not because of CO2, but because of the kind of solar activity we're about to experience and the amount of cosmic radiation that's about to be absorbed by this planet in the coming future, on top of a weaker than ever magnetosphere that haven't seen since the mid-1600s. That's the difference here. The difference is that we know there is a cycle, and we go by tree rings and ice sediments, ocean sediments, tree sediments, and these scientists have done years of research, and they have been able to pinpoint when we had these cold epochs. Right now, we're heading through what many are calling the Eddy minimum. Whether or not you believe the grand solar minimum doesn't get started in solar cycle 26, or you acknowledge that the very beginning of it is right now, because we're going to see a weak maximum. We're witnessing it right now. Sunspot number 32. We're in the middle of a damn maximum. The beginning of one, I should say, not in the middle, but the beginning of one. Very quiet sun for this time of year. But look at all these record cold that we've seen here in the Northeast. Early in the year, massive snowstorms covered much of the Pagonia in more than 150 centimeters, which is 60 inches of snow, and buried alive at least 100,000 sheep, 5,000 cattle. Snowfalls not seen for decades occurred in other parts of South America, in South Africa, southeastern Australia, and New Zealand. I can tell you right now, here in upstate New York, in the capital region, we received a December snowstorm like no other. I believe it was 2020. 36 inches of snow in one day. And I'm from Southwest Ohio, so the most I've ever seen in one day is 18 inches, period. Buffalo, even, we never got that big one. We got one storm that was 20-something inches, but we never got anything bigger than that. So 36 inches was a lot of snow. But that year, in the 2020 winter, that was when we saw the snow stay on the ground from December 15th of 2019, and we didn't see the grass, the melt, until March 16th of that 2020 early spring. Again, was this climate change? No, obviously not. In the summertime, we got hot, just like we got hot this summer so far. these are weather extremes. Again, the difference is that during this solar cycle that we're going to be experiencing, this grand minimum, we're going to be seeing frequent weather extremes: hot, cold, drought, and heat. It's going to be extreme. And they will continue to happen between now and the next 40 years, maybe even 50 years. I brought this report to your attention, and here looking at the drought report as well. Look at this. Severe drought is up a little bit, but they even cherry pick for all you naysayers from the 30s. They don't show that data. They show it started in the 50s, and really we saw an increase in forest fires in the late 80s, and then it climbed back down, and we've seen a slight bump in forest fires here in the 2020s. So according to this chart, they're being fair about severe fire here, or global drought, I should say. They are showing that there has been a slight increase, but in the late 80s, we had much worse severe drought. All right. If you look back into the past, we've had worse severe drought. We've had worse moderate drought. But if you look at the past 60 years of data, 60, 70 years, we don't see a decline, an increase. We don't see a steady up or down. All we see is a straight line going across, meaning that nature is nature, and she does have cycles that do not revolve around CO2. So why do here's the other one too, the hurricanes. Now, you may say to yourself, well, wow, we had a lot of hurricanes here. Yeah, but remember, these Atlantic hurricanes do not normally make landfall at any kind of strength. Most of the time, the high pressure gets a hold of them. They just turn around the Atlantic, and we throw them at the UK. Sorry about that, guys. But at least they're only low-pressure systems. They're not like full-fledged Cat 1s. Major hurricanes, again, we have seen an increase of major hurricanes since 1890. We saw a peak right before the 1960s, and I think slowly but surely we are starting another decline. Yes, you can see it. I'm not making this up. I know there's a lot of you that want to say, oh, look, it goes up. Whoop. I look at it as it going up, it peaked, and now it's taking its sweet old time coming down. So we can give them this. We have seen a little bit more major hurricanes in the recent future. Or is it, in fact, that we have better instruments now to record these major hurricanes than we did back here in the early days? And that's the thing. We just don't know. But at the same time, we are not seeing anything that would cause panic for any kind of climate crisis. Here's another graph here, starting in 1980, going all the way to 72. This is the annual global hurricanes. We see a slight increase, and then we see a decrease, and now it's just kind of flatlined and plateaued. Again, Al Gore and company told you that we were going to have more hurricanes devastating, wiping islands off of the face of the planet. No more snow, too, by the way. No more snow, but I just showed you all the cold records. So what's the point to all this, right? Why am I pointing all this out? The biggest thing, here's your tornadoes, by the way, folks. These are your stronger tornadoes. Again, I see a pattern of up and down, natural cycles. And again, before the 50s, we didn't have that great of technology that we do today. So it's not a climate change. Weather extremes are frequent or not frequent. In some of these cases, they're not frequent at all. Look at this. These are strong and violent tornadoes. And people in the 70s can tell you, especially ones that lived through the Xenia tornado in 74, which I'd have to say is this right here, because that one killed the most people on April 3rd, 1974. F5 tornado hit Xenia, Ohio, killing 33 just in Xenia. Others along this tornado outbreak lost their lives as well. The death toll was devastating. It was probably one of the most violent tornado outbreaks in the history of the United States. And since then, the data shows that we are seeing less of those. We saw a peak, it dropped, it started to go back up, and now it's probably dropping back again. We have not seen a giant jump in tornadic activity. Pardon me. We have seen stronger weather. We've seen strong storms, but again, those are considered weather extremes, not climate change. Wildfires. Here we go. Whoa, look at that. Annual Arctic forest area burned by wildfires. Obviously, that number's dropping in the Arctic, where it should be. It's cold up there, right? Burn is dropping in Australia. Burn here. What is this? Is this the U.S.? Here we go. Look at that. So the 1930s. Look at all that fire. Look at all that fire back here, guys. This is the chart that blows my mind the most because they tell you about global warming is causing so many forest fires. Here's the current data. Even if 2022 is up here, even if it is, 1 year is an anomaly. Look at the 30s into the 40s into the 50s. This is huge. The amount of acreage that was burned. And we were suffering from a major drought previous to the 50s. And the reason why we saw so many fires happening in the 50s was because of how dry it was. Those drought conditions don't clean up just overnight. We're talking about a serious drought that took place in the 20s and 30s and 40s. There are lingering effects. And you've got the WEF and Biden and all these other climate clowns telling you that we're in a crisis situation, that the world's going to end, but yet we've seen more annual burn in the past. Less population too, I might add. Again, great job by these guys here putting this report together. My gosh, look at this. Western North America wildfire occurrences since the 1600s. Right now, according to this chart here, and the source is from 800 sites, Thomas W. Sweatman. It has a link here as well. We're at the lowest that we've ever seen in the history of mankind since the modern minimum, ironically. Just goes to show you, folks, the natural part of climate cycles. We're not going to stop it. And, of course, a numerous list of references where it got the information on this. Really good PDF, and I really appreciate our good friend David Birch showing me that because the reason why I'm building up to is stuff like this. World Economic Forum. They believe that if they change the way we live our lives, that we will stop climate change. And I've said this for several years since I started doing this channel. These global elitists and these climate change frauds are hijacking a natural cycle called the grand solar minimum. Everything that they are telling you is going to happen is predicted in the same kind of weather that's going to happen during grand solar minimums. Extreme temperature swings of 50 to 80 degrees in one day. It's happened. I've seen it in the spring, 80 degrees one day, the next day 20 degrees and snowing. It's already happened a few times during our last minimum, more frequently in the 2019-2020 years, but we started seeing that begin 2016, 2017 as we declined into this last minimum. So there's so many events that are taking place that we can give credit to what happens during this particular solar cycle, but people like the World Economic Forum are trying to say that their efforts are going to create a barrier of climate change not happening, and we're all going to live happily ever after. I want you to explain to me how that if we are banning farmers, in fact, the UK has a voucher slip to fill out now, where if you're a farmer, you sell us your land, we'll give you X amount of dollars, and you're done. So the government's buying up all this farmland to grow the food, right? to control the food. Well, who says the government knows what they're doing when it comes to farming? Because if they did, we would never have world hunger. We would never see anyone go without a meal. So we're going to go ahead and throw out the world-class chef of a 5-star restaurant and bring in a McDonald's fry cook to run these farming projects. And that's what they're doing. These rich people, they're just going to throw money at other organizations who are just going to mishandle the money and not do what they're supposed to do. And we're going to run into major food shortages if this continues. The World Economic Forum is backing this effort of buying out farmland from farmers all over the world, not just here in the UK, but the United States, Sri Lanka. Mari just told me today, I believe South Africa is now, their people have had enough. There's violence going on in South Africa over the lack of food, the high prices, the cost of living, the energy prices soaring. And folks, it's coming here to the United States. For any of you who think that we're too big to fail and that we live in this Goldilocks country, you're about to see things that you thought you'd never see. And that's why so many of these channels have been preaching about prepping for so long. Now, we have a chance to stop these globalist elites if we can find some politicians out there who will take office and fight against these people, keep them from taking over the farmers' land and controlling the food processing. Because what the World Economic Forum wants is the population that we had 500 years ago, because it's easier to manage. When we had under 1 billion people 500 years ago, we have 8.1 billion people now. And the reason why the World Economic Forum wants to reduce the population is because they know what's coming. They know the world is going to run into some food problems. If we had a hard time feeding people back in 1600s and there was only 1 billion people or less, how are we going to be able to feed a population of 8.1 billion people where the breadbasket of Europe, Ukraine, is being pounded right now by Russia? Nothing to do with grand solar minimum. That hasn't even begun yet. We're already putting a dent in our supplies and our surplus. Old Biden, he likes to take credit for these gas prices dropping historically over the last month or so. He's so proud of it. He's so proud of it. But guess what he's doing, guys? He's depleting a crucial part of our oil. And there are 2 different kinds of oil, crude, that they can refine. That is an easy process. Okay? And that is the oil that Biden is giving away. The oil that we need to refine, we can't do here. We have to send it overseas. So this is an evil plan. This is not an accident. This was planned. Biden knew exactly what he was doing when he was dipping in the national reserves. He gave away the oil that would be easier on home refineries. Instead, we have a reserve full of oil that has to be shipped overseas first to be refined, then shipped back here to the United States. And what are they saying to that? That is going to lead to rising prices once again. Now, what have most of you done this summer because of high gas prices? Maybe you've cut back on that summer trip. Maybe you thought, maybe not this year. Maybe we'll sit this one out. Maybe not. Maybe you are still driving out there. But they're about to really put the screws on the world right now with this oil situation. They're giving us false hope. Barrel oil right now is $94 a barrel. It's below 100. Stayed that way now for a couple of weeks. That's good news. Gas prices coming down to about $4.39. But again, this all ties in to climate change. We would not be having a problem with oil right now if we didn't have world leaders that believed that oil was causing climate change. We would not be having a problem right now with farmers losing their land and going bankrupt because they're banning chemicals to grow their crops. They can't perform their jobs anymore because the World Economic Forum is banning it because they say that this is causing climate change. This new watered-down climate bill, now they're okay with just getting into striking distance of the climate goals. At first, they said this climate bill was only going to be $369 billion. Now the price tag is over $740 billion. Now, that is over 10 years, but we're almost at $1 trillion on this climate bill. And the purpose of my channel is to show you folks this right here is reporting about weather extremes that happen from time to time, and they show you the proof, the data that proves to you that it's been hotter, it's had more fires, we've seen more cold than hot, we've seen more death in the past than we have today. But we're supposed to fall in line and do these clean energy things that all these world leaders seem to think that's going to change climate. Even our Republican lawmakers, they still think that there's some involvement with humans. The next time you ask someone, or next time someone tells you that CO2 drives the climate, ask them how much of the atmosphere is made up of CO2. Ask them that. They won't be able to tell you. The answer is 0.004%. Look it up. This is not made up facts. But the majority of the people that are going to tell you that CO2 is a problem, they don't even know that fact. They're just parrots and puppets following along with an agenda, and they're getting paid really handsome by groups like WEF and company. So the education of this channel, people need to pay attention. We need to understand that they are trying to fool us with their fake gimmicks and their tricks about climate change and how we're supposed to see all these crazy hurricanes and how much more intense it's going to be, right? What's going on out here right now, folks? This is the next tropical forecast for the next 5 days. Not today. There's nothing out there that gives a 0 to 40% chance of any kind of development. But Al Gore and Greta and WEF and company, they're all telling you what a climate crisis we're in right now. Yeah, we're having floods in Kentucky. They live in a very odd terrain. We have mountains, we have mudslides. Flash flooding in dry areas could be very dangerous. That's what we saw in Missouri. We're having severe drought problems across the central part of the United States. When you have large amounts of rain dropping really fast, you will see that water travel just as fast. That's why we get all the flash flooding. But these are not climate change. This is extreme weather events, not climate change. Because if it was climate change, since 2005, I guess we should start seeing these really intense hurricanes for the last 3 or 4 years. And we haven't. Yeah, we had 30 named storms, but they all hung out in the Atlantic Ocean and did nothing. We had 2 landfalls last year. One was a Cat 1 as it hit the Northeast. Okay, and by the time it hit, near New Jersey and New York City, it quickly went to a depression. It barely made landfall as a Cat 1, all right? We had another storm that skirted the coast of Carolinas last year in Virginia. No big deal. So that's why I do what I do. I want people to wake up, stop voting for these politicians who are going to put these stupid policies in place, and they're doing it right in front of your faces. They are telling you the plan. The plan is to reduce population because they know they don't have enough food to feed the world. They know that it's easier to take care of themselves than the few rich elite. Here's a look at our UAH satellite-based temperatures. We rose to 0.36. If you guys follow me on Twitter, I guessed yesterday at 0.31, and that was pretty good, I thought. I wasn't looking at nothing. That was just a sheer stab in the dark, yes. So, hey. I think David Birch, he was at 0.3. So we were all in the ballpark on this. Look, we had some hot weather in the UK, across the central part of the United States. So yeah, we saw some warmer temperatures. It is July in the northern hemisphere. It's summertime. I wouldn't expect any less, but still, 0.36 degrees for the month of July above baseline is by no means a climate emergency or anything that warrants any new kind of spending, especially here in the United States, that's aimed at climate change for any reason, whether they're now shooting for 40% reduction or not. There is no reason during a time of recession that our lawmakers should be putting out laws that increase taxes and will make inflation worse by the first quarter. This bill alone will give us a double punch of the recession by quarter one. Well, it'll look like we're pulling out of it in Q4. And then, bam, out of nowhere. And this all time, and people are like, oh, Jake, don't take the politics out of this. Just stick with it. No, you can't take the politics out of this. Because the politicians are the ones that are creating these problems, these energy problems, these gas problems, these food problems. These are all because of governments and leaders who believe in CO2 driving the climate. When in fact I showed you last night an article that scientists say, well, if we have reflected particles in the atmosphere, we can block the sun, reflect it back into space, and that'll help with temperatures. So they're basically admitting that the sun controls the temperatures, because otherwise, shouldn't we be finding ways to reject all the CO2 that's being put in the atmosphere, not the sun? Makes no sense. These people don't even think about what they're writing half the time. All right, let's do a couple shout outs here before I get off of the air tonight. Want to say hello to a few folks out there. Knife Collector, as always, Shirley Davis, I should say. My wife, Mari. Melody, good to see you in the chat as well. Kansas, Terry. Arnold Schmidt, hello there. Robert Hill, good to have you on board as well. Patricia Clayton, as always, thank you so much for your support. Folks, I can't tell you how much it means to us that you continue to support us like you do, and you guys take care of us big time. We continue to ask for the support on the Patreon network. You can join our channel for only $1. And right now it's being considered just like a tip jar. But in the near future, we will be ramping up broadcasts, daily and weekend shows as well. Guys, we got more to talk about. I'm going to cut this broadcast off, but I think either tomorrow or Thursday, I want to get more into the farming aspect of what's going on with the climate, the drought, and what kind of yields we're looking at, and how bad could it get this fall. And not only that, but what we're going to see in prices on food by January after Christmas. Again, I don't know how we pull out of this when we know the facts, when we know climate's a factor here, when we also know that we have a war going on in the breadbasket of the agriculture department in Europe. So there's so many things that are playing in a factor that are natural and that are man-made, but it has nothing to do with CO2. Hey, maybe I'll make a shirt that says it has nothing to do with CO2. I like that. All right, guys, that's going to do it for me tonight. Thank you for tuning in to this Grand Solar Minimum News Update. We hope everyone has a safe evening. Till next time, we'll talk soon.
Do you like this show? Give us a thumbs up. Want to support us more? Share to your favorite social media platform. Buy a t-shirt or become a Patreon. All links are in the description below.